Hey everybody, this is Taz Street with Positive Out Loud. Today I have a very awesome guest. His name is Douglas Johnson. And Douglas has done quite a bit these past many years. He has done things like he's become an actual teaching trainer for yoga. And is there a certain type of yoga that you like to teach more, or?
Right now, for the training, I generally do Yin Yoga.
Yin Yoga, okay.
Probably in the next few years, I'll develop a training that's just for everything. But the Yin was there was a absence of trainings where I live, and I needed somebody to cover my classes, and one could. So I decided to create the training so that I could have people who could cover for me.
Awesome. So I know you've been doing this for over 20 years. You also are into doing different types of retreats, workshops, kirtans. You're a meditation teacher, and then you're also a teacher, yoga of sound, which I think is pretty cool. So we'll get into some of that later on. So tell us a little bit about what got you into all these different type of healing modalities, all these different types of spiritual modalities as well. Were there some challenges you had growing up before you found all this? How did this all come about?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I definitely, didn't grow up in a picture perfect household. I don't think anybody does, but my household, family of origin, was definitely dysfunctional. I had a few people who they were never diagnosed because they never would submit to, sort of like a psychological test, or, they would never go for help. But these were people who were probably at best had narcissistic tendencies, and at worst, maybe even personality disorder or sociopath. I'm not an expert in that field, but growing up, I didn't know that. I just knew that like family life was really hard. Like, just getting along with people who are in my family was like next to impossible. And after growing up, leaving home, you discover like, oh wow, like these people I'm related to are like impossibly difficult, and most people aren't. But you don't know that growing up. You just are kind of like, okay, this is, I guess, how people are.
What kind of difficulties did you experience?
Just an unwillingness to compromise, an unwillingness to ever admit fault on certain parties. Also, other people in my family who weren't those personalities were, basically like workaholics. So they would, remove themselves from the situation and basically be like, well, I don't, this doesn't have to, I'm going back to work, that's what I do. So it was, as a child in that environment, it was definitely very difficult. Surprisingly though, I definitely, picked some stuff up, but I think on balance, oddly enough, it didn't go that deep, and it wasn't that much. So it's interesting because actually my father said it's a miracle that you came through all of that, like seemingly okay, because he was convinced like I was just going to be marred for life and damaged by that. So
were there some like survival techniques that you had to do for yourself, you think, or some things that you had to adjust in order just to feel like,
well, yeah, I mean, there definitely was certain things were like talking back was not, that's what it was. You weren't allowed to explain your perspective or say, hey, that's not right or whatever. That's talking back.
Right.
Actually, my parents would say things like children should be seen and not heard. Some really kind of old school stuff that these days I think people wouldn't even dream of saying to children. But a lot of hitting, spanking for your own good, a lot of that. So violence, physical violence, verbal abuse, a lot of that happening. And, in terms of coping, I don't know. I think actually, I didn't develop that many coping, mechanisms. It again, surprisingly, I was able to get through that. And then once I was on my own in college, I began noticing the things that I'd sort of picked up in my family of origin. So, there were certain things where in my family of origin, there was a lot of expectation. And so I found myself doing that to other people. And I was like, God, that's no good. And so I began, people who are close to me, friends of mine, who I'm like super grateful to, by the way, because they did stick by me, when I picked up these awful kind of, that I thought was normal. I thought that was normal to expect all this stuff of other people and, all these kinds of things. Once I got out of my house, I realized like, yeah, that's not really healthy or normal.
Yeah,
So
kids we're like, a parrot. Parrot will pick up whatever is around it, right? And as kids, we're soaking up all that behavior, all the way that we relate to each other. That's what we learn. And so we go out into the world and we're like, it's not working out very well. And sometimes you don't even realize what you're doing when you're out in the world. You're like, what's wrong with these people? They're not normal. I'm normal. It's kind of it's a weird situation that sometimes it takes a while for us to learn.
Yeah. So that was my 20s, sort of in college. And around that time, I was a philosophy major, and I was studying in university philosophy, and my mother is Japanese. And so at a certain point, I was talking with my advisor, and he said, yeah, you should take some. I thought, I have an interest in Eastern philosophy, and should I take that? And he said, yeah, I think that'd be great. That would round out your your studies in a nice way. So I started taking Eastern philosophy, what they called Eastern philosophy, and got introduced to Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism and those concepts. And the teacher one day just listed a very kind of matter of fact on the blackboard, here are the benefits of meditation that we can prove scientifically. And it was, I don't remember what they were. And this was in the 90s. So this was a while ago. I'm sure they have way more stuff that they've done now. Because
I'm surprised they were doing that in the 90s. That's awesome.
Yeah. Me too. But I think these were actually studies that were probably done in maybe even the 70s, the 60s, 70s, like with early Zen meditators, like with whatever tools they had.
Yeah.
So, it's things like increased concentration, lower blood pressure, more of a sense of relaxation. I don't even remember, but they were things that kind of addressed things that I had, like I had trouble focusing and things like that, anxiety, maybe. I don't remember what was listed, but whatever it was appealing to me. And so I began, I had a friend who knew someone who's going to a Zen center, and he said, oh, you should go, because I mentioned this to him. And I went, and I started going to this meditation center. And again, interestingly, to your point where you said, was there something early childhood that brought you to this? I was kind of like the exception, because most people there were coming from a place of, that they were trying to heal from something, or they were trying to fix something. And I was just kind of like, oh, I'm going to get all these benefits from meditating. And I had at the time, I was what you might call materialist, and I was an atheist. I mean, I just really didn't, I was studying philosophy, and I was like, yeah, that's all superstition. People are imagining all this stuff in their head and wishful thinking, whatever it is. So I went there, and I had zero expectation of anything spiritual happening.
That's good. You didn't have any expectations. It's kind of good in a way, right?
I think it really helped, actually. I really do. And the Zen Center, at least at that time, and the group that I was with, they were very, I don't want to say secular, but they were very low key on anything like really spiritual trappings. They were just kind of like meditate and, you'll get everything you need to get from that.
Mhm.
And they were right about that. That's the beautiful thing about it. And at this stage, I have both things that I really appreciate about the Zen tradition that helped me, but then there are also things that I, as a teacher, have had to sort of move away from the way things are done, because I feel like my students, or where we are now, is maybe a little different. But for me, it was perfect, because they were not talking about God or spirituality or spirit or universe, or they were just like, sit down, meditate, and you'll get everything you need to get. So I did that, and lo and behold, at some point, not that long, it didn't take that long, interestingly, I had some really powerful awakening, what I would call spiritual awakening experiences. And at first, I tried very hard to sort of process them through my materialistic kind of viewpoint of like, okay, there's this things happening in my brain, and all that, which we're finding out is true. So it's not like that's totally wrong. They say meditation rewires your brain, and so that definitely things were happening on the physical level. But I was still kind of like, I don't want to get into all this belief of more than what I can actually experience. But there was definitely something that was transcendent about those experiences, and I had several, and they would last sometimes for like weeks on end. Like I would just wake up in this very, very, I don't know what the right word is for it, but everything was the same, but everything was completely different. So it's not like I'm looking at the computer and I'd be like, oh, I can see through the computer, or it wasn't anything like that, but it was like, wow, a computer, like that is, I've never done like drugs and stuff, so but it's what many people describe as like psychedelic type experience, like where you're like, whoa, my hand, oh, it was exactly that. It just, life itself was profound, and it was seen very clearly. It was a miracle, and it was seen very clearly that all the running around we're doing, all the fear, that stuff was just not necessary. It was all for what? It didn't make any sense in that state. And so I would have those experiences, completely changed my life. And then I was really young. I was in my 20s. And I think this is where my teachers maybe didn't do the best job of helping me post-awakening. And that's something I really emphasize in my training, is post-awakening, because I've found actually as a teacher, it's not that hard to wake people up. I have techniques that I can use. It's not 100%, but there's some pretty reliable things. If people are open, they're willing to listen, you can give them an experience where they begin to sort of wake up to the truth of reality. But I got very, very confused about many things at that point. And Zen is so, and I'm not trying to criticize the Zen tradition. So I'm sure there are people out there who practice and it's working great for them. I'm just talking about me, my journey, my little group, the teachers that were there.
Yeah.
I needed a little more recognition of just how profound that experience was. Instead, it was almost kind of poo-pooed. It was almost like, yeah, good, keep going. And it was sort of like this. And I'm like, no, you don't. If you're like telling me that in that way, I am doubting that you've had this experience. That was kind of my feeling. It's like,
it probably was the way it was, right? Yeah, I mean, because they didn't understand. Yeah,
it may be because it was just this sort of like, yes, good, keep going kind of thing. And one teacher even said, oh, you got to peek in the tent. And I was like, no, you're not understanding. Like, and there was a very common thing that happened to me, which happens to many people. I got it, I lost it. So there was that feeling, and there was a lot of things going on. So I think at a certain point, I was sort of like, okay, I'm young. I need to figure out my career. I need to figure out what's going on. Like spirituality can wait, like Zen can wait. I'll dive deeper into that later, but I need to establish myself now. And I don't know what your experience is, Taz, but mine is once you have an awakening like that, it's like the ego has a certain kind of energy of its own. So, you see big industry, you see big business, you see politicians. This is a lot of ego energy. And I don't mean it in a good or bad way. It's just, that's what it is. It has a certain kind of energy, and it's very good at kind of accomplishing stuff in the world. Well, that had all but like left me. It was like, I describe it like a balloon, and you like put a little leak in the balloon, and so it's slowly deflating. That was like my ego. So all the power that it may have once had for me to achieve all that stuff that I thought I wanted to achieve my life, like that was just slowly going away. And I'm in my early 20s, so I just found like whatever I tried to do, it just I didn't have the energy for it. I didn't believe it enough to like really push for anything. And I ended up kind of like, for lack of a better way of putting it, bottoming out at a certain point where I ended up in the hospital, didn't have health insurance. So I had a huge, surgery, ended up in hospital for appendectomy, ended up with a huge bill, didn't have a job that would, allow me to cover that, ended up in bankruptcy. And in my family, that was shameful. I know some people just, bankruptcy. Yeah. You had a hard time. So just declare bankruptcy, clean the slate, in 7 years, you'll be good to go.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in court, there was a lady who was there, and she had like declared bankruptcy like 3 other times.
Oh, wow.
So some people, it's just kind of like, I do this every so many years and just clear the slate. It's a legal technique or a business technique for them. For me and my family, that was like, you are just trash. Like, what's wrong with you? Only people who are, who can't get their life together and are just losers and ne'er-do-wells. Those are people who declare bankruptcy. We don't. And so for me, that was almost like a little death. It was like something in my mind. I was like, I will never do that. And there I was doing it. And that was a really important turning point, because from that point on, I think that was kind of a big death blow for what was left of the egoic structure. Because like many people, it wasn't completely blown out. It was able to kind of reformulate. And at that point, I really surrendered in a big way and I was just sort of like, okay, universe, God, I tried, I thought this was what I was supposed to do, what I was pursuing. And I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm supposed to, well, how can I serve? What can I do? And that's when my current path sort of very quickly formulated. And it started with teaching yoga professionally. I had been teaching meditation since the early days. They asked me fairly early on to start, leading newcomer sessions and teaching people. And I had friends and people who I would kind of advise as well, but it wasn't a professional position. That was an all volunteer organization.
Yeah, it's interesting how a lot of these spiritual type teachers are not getting paid, right? And you're investing your time and helping people on a really deep level. So there's no reason why that should be voluntary, in my opinion. Yeah,
it's an interesting thing in this country, because in I think what people maybe don't understand about how things are structured in the East, it's a lot like tithing at your church, but in the East also as well, I think in a similar manner, like many of those cultures, it's actually seen as good karma to give to a holy person or a spiritual teacher or something like that. So, someone whose child is sick, right? If they saw you, Taz, as like a spiritual person, spiritual teacher, then they might actually take some money and like donate that to you, and in the hopes that offering to a holy person or a spiritual teacher is going to help their child get better. So, it's not all altruistic. It's not like, oh, in the East, they're so enlightened and they just give money to spiritual teachers and support them. but we definitely don't have that in this country at all. People are used to giving to their church, but outside of that, it's pretty much like, yeah, why, you can advise me, you can put video.
And we'll pay thousands of dollars to go to the doctor as well. Yep. Because there's all different types of spiritual healing and energetic healing and that sort of thing. And it just amazes me. We'll go to the doctor and they'll cut out one of our organs and we'll pay them thousands of dollars for that. But we won't go to an energetic healer so that we can keep that in our body where it's meant to be and clear it out energetically or, spiritually. So yeah, and we don't want to pay money for that either.
Right. Even if we have a friend who does that and they work on us, then it's like, oh, I'll buy you a meal. It's something like that. And there's you're right. It's interesting. So it is an interesting thing. I've done both. I've had periods where I will just say, donation, whatever you can afford or whatever you want, you feel like my services, whatever value you think they have. And then at other times I've charged and charged well for what I do, because I very much value my time. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting tension. I think I don't have a clear answer for it. I don't think asking for donations is wrong or bad. I think it can work again if people are educated and they understand that you're providing a service is valuable, maybe more valuable than most other services, and that you need to pay rent, bills just like everyone else. Right. And then great. But I also it's interesting because in our culture a lot of times we don't value what doesn't have a price tag. So there can be an argument for, if you charge and you charge well for what you do as a spiritual teacher, you may attract a clientele that's more serious. Yeah. And that when they pay the money, they're going to actually listen to you because they've paid good money to get the advice or the service or whatever it is you're providing. Mm-hmm. So they take it a little more seriously than if like, hey, yeah, let's do a Zoom meeting and I'll counsel you on something. And they're like, oh, I did this free meeting with, my yoga teacher and whatever, kind of thing. Whereas if it's like $100, several $100s, then, they might take notes and listen. And, it's a case by case basis, but there is a little bit of a psychological play there, I think, as well. So I don't look down or think that it's bad or wrong for teachers to charge or even charge a lot, because I think it can, and at least in our culture, for some people, that could make the difference between really listening and hearing. Absolutely. Right. Yeah. I think it's as long as people are doing this from the heart and really wanting to help people, it definitely should be valuable, and they should charge a reasonable amount for it. So that's what I truly believe. Because once you get in our culture, like you said, once you get into the whole donation thing, people are going to give like $5-10 or, and then you're like, or nothing. I've had that happen before, like, oh, that's such a huge help. Thank you so much. And, and then it's just sort of like, there isn't, it's funny because sometimes it's people with the most money that I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and they were sort of like, yeah, people with a lot of money can be funny, where it's almost like, because it's so, they have so much of it, they don't think of it. So they don't even think of like, that, oh, you probably need money, or you probably need to be compensated, or they just sort of like, it doesn't even occur to them. They're just sort of, if you say, hey, you need to pay this, I'm like, oh, of course. Yeah. But it's funny. They might just not even, they're just like, oh, thank you so much. That's great. And then they assume they'll get a bill or something in the mail, because that's what they're used to. And this whole conversation is interesting because when you talk about bankruptcy, I had bankruptcy when I was in my early 20s as well. And you just feel so horrible that you have to do this. It feels like you don't have another choice because you got yourself in this situation and this is just the way it is. And then you think about it, it's like, wow, I owed this company this much and that.
but when it really comes down to it, those companies are doing pretty well without you paying them a few $1,000s, you know what I mean? But yeah, it's something that you have to work through. And I think everybody has in this culture has such money issues, when it comes to their energy around it. What does it mean to them? How does it work for them? And I came from a place of where we didn't have as much money growing up. So I went into the military where, they took care of everything there for me. I had a place to stay, I had food and that sort of thing. And then once I got out, it was like, whoa, what do I do now? And I think that's what created that whole thing where I just was spending too much and I didn't realize, because I was never really taught how to budget or how to do any of that stuff. I mean, my mother taught me how to do a checking account and that sort of thing, but it didn't really like ring true until you're actually experiencing it in the world. And now I think from learning from all of that, what I shouldn't do. And now I'm much better and I have plenty of, resources now, but, and able to save and that sort of thing and invest. And I think it's so important for people to realize a lot of times we just learn through experience, right?
Yeah, it's funny because we go to school and we spend all this time getting educated, but some very basic things like budgeting, like you said, like I wasn't really taught that either by my parents or by the education system. I mean, balancing a checkbook isn't the same thing as budgeting, right? So, I mean, sure, my parents might show me how to balance a checkbook, but that doesn't mean that I understand the concept of, okay, I've got this much money coming in. So, I take a little bit, goes here, some goes there, and paying off my bills, save a little bit, staying within your budget, all of those types of concepts. And I think it is a cultural, I don't know that I could say it's intentional, but it's definitely widespread where most, I think, Americans they think it's normal to live beyond their means. They think it's normal to charge a lot on credit. It's a kind of a sick relationship with income and money and how we live and all the stuff that we have, all the abundance, which is beautiful in one sense, but I don't want to come off the wrong way, but it's kind of disgusting in another sense. It's just all the stuff that we have and how disposable it all is. And especially these days, I find a lot of things you purchase them and it's almost designed to be disposable. Like it's not really meant to last more than a year or two. And it's made of materials that fall apart. I have a bag that I've had for a long time. And, some of the materials are still together, but the parts of it are just completely falling apart and disintegrating. And it's kind of interesting. Like, is this designed? Because I remember my father had bags that were like canvas wax bags that he had gotten in the military, and like they're probably still somewhere, in one piece, and could still be used. Yeah. And it's the quality of the way things are made now. Yeah, for sure. Because if they don't make it quality, then you're going to buy some more from them next year, right? So yeah, absolutely. And the fact that credit cards, they push those credit cards out to people when they're young, and they're like, wow, I have all this money in this credit card I can use. And so it's not, I don't think it's just an individual fault. I think it's a collective cultural. Yes. And especially with the way the companies are designed to make you want to purchase things. And back in the day, I just wanted to buy this coolest clothes, I wanted to have a new car, and I did all that, and I kind of went around it the way that probably I shouldn't have. But I learned. And you move from there, and you realize those are not the things that are going to make you happy in life. Yes, definitely. Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about some of the things that you're doing in your Patreon. What kind of things are you helping people with? Yeah, so I have maybe kind of like two phases of what I've been doing so far. Pre-pandemic, I was teaching a lot of yoga classes, doing a lot of retreats. I, maybe unlike other teachers who have my level of experience in training, I haven't emphasized the training part because I was really interested in awakening and waking people up. And in yoga, it's big business to train people because people pay a lot to be trained. But my feeling was, from a spiritual perspective, like we really need people to wake up to their nature. So I don't personally feel like we need more yoga teachers. I feel like
there's a ton of yoga teachers.
Everybody and their mother is a certified yoga teacher. That's what I found. So probably half the people in my classes have a yoga certification. So that to me, I'm like, sure, I could do it in a different way. And one day maybe I will do that. And I will try and, perhaps raise the bar of what that means to be a yoga teacher. That's kind of my interest. But in the meantime, I felt like what I was being asked to do, my calling, if you will, was to wake more people up and really focus on that. So pre-pandemic, I was doing a lot of retreats. We do really deep energetic work, dealing with, again, just things that we have in the body, like really stuck, in the tantric tradition, we get stuck energy, vasanas, samskaras, those types of things. And over the years, I developed, more and more tools, or got more and more tools to do that. So started with just the yoga postures and meditation. And then I eventually learned or refined my use of something called yoga nidra, which is like a yogic sleep. So it's like a guided meditation done laying down. And then the last thing I added was the kirtan, which is the yoga of sound, if you will, chanting and using music as part of that experience. So I found that that's actually a type of Kundalini practice, and it actually can, move energy. And I found many people actually have issues with throat chakra and speaking out and singing out, having their voice heard. So I found that's a very powerful practice. One, for kind of uniting people. Like if you have a group of people, they may not all be able to do like yoga postures, and they may not all be flexible or strong, but almost everybody can sing. Maybe they're not all comfortable singing. Maybe not everyone has a beautiful voice, but the majority of people can communicate, speaking. And if you can speak, you can sing. Maybe not well, maybe no one else wants to hear you, but you can sing. So that was something I brought in, the kind of last thing I brought in, but even that's been years. And when the pandemic hit, I found that there was a shift. I had to move much more of what I was doing online, which was something I wasn't really keen on doing pre-pandemic, because I love being in person with people. I think there's a certain kind of energy that's there.
Yeah, it's so much different. Yeah. Right.
So you agree. And then I also found that lots of people were hitting kind of a wall. So my most powerful tool, I think, is meditation that I teach traditionally. And so I found people were kind of hitting a wall with their practices, with their meditation. And what I feel like I was coming up against is something that you and I both, what connected us is Scott's work with repressed emotions and trauma and chronic pain and all that kind of stuff. That's where I felt like, okay, I feel like these people need my help and support, but I don't feel like I have the training to do that. I can intuitively help, and I was able to do that, but it felt not very skilled. It felt like, okay, I would have to do a lot of this before I really developed a methodology to systematically help people with what's happening. And so that's where I began looking for someone who has dealt with a lot of that. And I just remembered, Scott Killaby, some of his videos online talking about these kinds of things. So I looked to see what was going on, and I just kind of, again, universe is wonderful. Things just align when they're supposed to. And he was putting out, hey, I'm doing one-on-one training, email here if you want to train me. And I was like, okay, I usually train every year. I do something to expand my tool set as a teacher.
I understand. Yeah, I'd like to do that too.
Yeah, it feels right, because otherwise it just starts feeling really stagnant and still, and like you're not growing.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, this will be this year's training. I'll do this.
So when did you do this with Scott?
Started, I think, in November or December.
Mhm.
I just took my time with it. I wasn't really in any kind of rush.
Okay.
And I just did my test out certification on Thursday.
Oh, awesome. Congratulations.
So now,
Yeah.
thank you. Thanks. So that's a tool. It's interesting because it was really my students, what I was feeling like they were needing. I think, like to your point earlier, a lot of people are drawn to KI because of it's something they need. And for me, it really felt more like this is what my students need. Like they're coming up against this stuff.
So when you did the one-on-one sessions, what's some of the stuff that came up for you that you think is kind of pretty universal for everybody?
Very little, and that's what's kind of that's what's
Oh.
it really was. Scott said, like, it's clear you've done a lot of work on yourself. Yeah. So for me, like the meditation, what I see with a lot of people, even within like the KI community, is there's just the subtle resistance, and it's so hard to see when you're in the middle of it. But if you can see that, mm-hmm. then so much can happen. So KI for me is a tool set. It's definitely not the only way to handle that stuff. So I think if you approach meditation in the right way, if you really understand what teachers like Rupert Spira are talking about, like, surrendering, allowing, when the stuff comes up, Rupert says, ask the question, can I be okay with this sensation or feeling or emotion being present forever from here on out? Like, I'm not
kind of like what KI is. Yeah, exactly. Right.
And so if you can really understand that, you don't need anything. It's really very, very simple from my perspective. Like if you can really surrender, if you really get what that means,
just let it all go.
That includes surrendering the desire to get rid of it. Like, because a lot of people will say, well, I'm surrendering so I can get rid of it. It's like, no, that's not really surrender. I'm surrendering. Why isn't it gone yet? Like, because that's a subtle level of resistance, and that's enough to hold it in place. So for me, at least thus far, I mean, I'm never going to say, oh, I'm done, there's nothing there, whatever. But Scott and I found very little when we were working together in me. Our conversations were more just sort of like, sharing experiences. And for me as a teacher, it was so valuable. And I love talking with someone like Scott, because it's kind of lonely, to be really honest. It's having someone who has a very high level of realization and maybe has some of the same sorts of experiences. Because I was like sharing with Scott, I'm like, I tend to be a very divisive figure in the community, like yoga community. Then I'm like, people tend to love me and be like, oh my God, like you're amazing. Or they tend to be like, oh, that guy, I hate that guy. Like, I can't stand him. And I get it. Like, I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm definitely not for everybody. And, I can see if you are at a certain stage where somebody like me would be very triggering, and you would be like, I don't want anything to do with that. So, having Scott be like, oh yeah, I get that. Like that, I'm the same way. Like that, just that is like valuable for me, like that, having that communication where, because it's not that I doubt what I'm doing, or, and it's not that I can't improve and refine what I'm doing. I'm constantly trying to do that. But there is just a certain kind of comfort in, another teacher being like, yeah, I get that too. And so a lot of our sessions were maybe more along those lines, and me sort of asking technical questions. It was less of him facilitating me, which maybe most people's, training is more like that. I don't honestly know. I don't know what he does, but we started with going through like the vulnerability inquiries and things like that. And, there was some little stuff there, but I was surprised actually that I didn't find more stuff that was like, from my child. But I mean, it really, when I brought up my family of origin, there really wasn't strong charges there. There really wasn't.
Yeah, when you hear about some of the people in the group talking about like they just can't even look at that, it's just so much. But when I do the KI myself, or when I listen to Scott, I'm in that, just doing it as a group, I can look at it pretty easily and just be with it, because I think I've done a lot of work in my life. I've been doing work since my early 30s, and I'm 52 now. So, and I think all those years of experience of just doing a bunch of energetic work and looking at your stuff already, doing a lot of forgiveness work. I mean, all kinds of spiritual work. I think it really pays off in the end, because then you don't have all that stuff accumulated inside of you, all those repressions, and having to deal with it as you get older. I mean, yeah, I still have lots of stuff I need to work through, but at least I can sit there and look at it without getting crazy over it.
I love that you said forgiveness, Taz, because that's a huge thing. For me personally, it helped me a lot. Non-judgment, forgiveness. And that is something that I try and convey to my students. So in my opinion, if you can really forgive, like not, giving it lip service, if you really can let go of the judgment and you can really forgive, you may not need like KI on a lot of stuff, because you can really let stuff go. That's been my experience. And that's where a lot of my teaching has, in the past, a lot of things I've emphasized. So I'll talk a lot about Jesus as a teacher, because I feel like,
I love Jesus. Yeah.
He was really good at, so I really try and convey to people, like, you're creating your own suffering by creating this, again, self and other, this identity, like, they're the one doing it and they're doing it to me. I'm the victim of them. And, so if you can really go back to your family of origin, wherever those wounds started, or you can start where you are. I mean, if you're having a thing with your partner, like, you can start right there. But if you can trace back where these, deficiency stories and things came from, and how they, how you create, again, the other and the self and the suffering that comes from that dynamic. I mean, so much can be done. What I like about the KI, and the reason I'm studying it and I'm a student of Scott's, is I do like how surgical it is.
Yeah, it's very deep and just like gets right down to the core. It's amazing.
Yes. I love that, because I can say to a student, like, forgiveness, what do they take away from that, right? Do they really get it? Do they really apply it? I find a lot of times students will apply it in some areas and then not others. And I'm kind of like, no, universally, forgiveness, and non-judgment. So, well, my parents did this, they did that, and again, I'm almost like grateful at this point that I grew up in such a dysfunctional household, because a few things, for a few reasons. One is, I definitely, if I had had a picture perfect family, then, I mean, I wouldn't be able to relate to a lot of what people are going through. But I mean, my family was, again, abusive, verbally, physically. It was not pleasant. And again, I had several figures like that. And then there were other people who were just basically checked out, so there wasn't, I didn't have a single that I can think of awake presence in my family of origin, or even within my bubble growing up. It was like zero. There was no one who I would call like spiritually sane in my orbit. Like, some people would be like, well, I had my grandma, she got it, or I had an uncle and he would, or whatever it is, or my sibling, like, I didn't have that. I was really like on my own. And it was later that I figured out that, that in a sense, the perspective that I had was really the sane one, and that all that other stuff was just this insanity that was going on around. But I'm grateful to them for that, because otherwise people be like, well, you had, you grew up with Leave It to Beaver or whatever perfect family, and so you can't relate. But I absolutely can relate. The other thing I'm grateful for is, I think if I didn't have these narcissistic, personality, these functional relationships, I think when I'm counseling students and they come to me with certain problems, I think I might have been tempted to be like, well, just be patient with them, and just try and understand, and just try and forgive, and just try and be whatever. Like a kind of a spiritual bypass. I think I would have felt that, well, they're good at heart, which I believe, right? I still do believe that, but just from my experience, I know there are certain relationships that are just damaging.
Yeah.
And
time to go. Boom.
Right. You just do need to recognize those, and it doesn't matter how spiritual you are or whatever, what you're practicing, you do want to remove yourself or limit your exposure to those things. And I often describe, those family members of mine as like a force of nature. So if I do interact with them, it's a little bit like walking into a tornado. So tornadoes, just, it is what it is. It's not good or bad, just is. And if a tornado is coming toward your house and you choose to stay, then yeah, you're probably gonna get roughed up, right? You can expect it. Yeah. And so it's like that with certain people. Like, it's funny how people are like, well,
energy is energy, no matter what it is, whether it's a person,
or they're like, it's my brother, it's my mom, so
or a dog or an animal, or it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So if you go through that door, you enter into that relationship, you can expect to be treated a certain way. And if you're okay with that, then continue. But if you're every time coming out of that with wounds and bewilderment, like, well, why do they do that? It's like, that's just their nature. Maybe it can change, maybe it can't. I in my experience with at least people with those kind of narcissistic or sociopath, I don't see change. They're not generally interested in spiritual work, not in a real way, not in a transformative way. And they're usually just interested in putting it on you. And it's not, like, I'm the first one to be like, I'm very human, make mistakes all the time. Like, that's just going to continue to happen. So anyone who's, I'll tell my students, like, if you're looking for some kind of like perfect holy person, that's going to teach you, like, I'm not it. So keep looking. Like, this is a very human here. And I actually think that that's an important thing. And that's another thing I appreciate about Scott and how he presents his work. It's not presented as this, I've got it all figured out, I'm perfect, model me, kind of thing.
Well, really, the person that says that, you better walk the other way.
I agree. Yeah. But it's funny in spirituality how much people, they want that. They want someone who's going to stand up and be like, I got it. I'm like, your spiritual mommy or daddy. Come to me. I'll take care of it all for you. And just how appealing that is to people.
Well, probably because they didn't have that as a kid. So,
maybe. And I don't know. It's an odd thing. And it, perfectly grown, logical, smart people will still go for that. And a lot of people go for that. I'd say more people go for that than for like the way that Scott presents or I present, which is like, yes, very human, gonna make mistakes. It's okay. We all do. It's part of being human. So let's just get over that part. Let's not expect the teacher to be infallible. Instead, let's try and really hear their message. And one of the things I love about the Zen tradition is it's such a rich tradition. There's so much valuable in there. But one expression they have is when someone's pointing to the moon, look at the moon and not the finger. right? Because what a lot of people do is they'll look at the teaching or the teacher and they'll start poking holes. Yeah, the teaching's not going to be perfect. The teacher's not going to be perfect. No form is perfect. There's no such thing. So if you're looking for holes or faults, you're going to find them. But if you look at what the teacher's pointing to, that's the value of the teacher, then you get what the teacher is really doing. So, it's an important thing to understand. And I think I agree with you. If someone stands up and is like, I got it, I've got it all figured out, I'm perfect, model me, I would probably run as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, I think it is on some level, at least for some people, and I think a lot of people, it's appealing.
Oh, very appealing. I mean, it's rampant in companies and politics and all that. They think that these leaders are perfect, which we know they're not. So absolutely, I agree with that. What I find really interesting is the kirtan. So you said you've been doing that for a while now. And what type of thing, what does that do to help release? Will that help release certain things, help release motions? What exactly does it do?
Yeah, I think so. So I think it works in a few different levels. One is it's simply, not sure how familiar you are with yoga terms, but pranayama, breathing techniques, breath retention, controlling the breath. At the most basic, singing is breath control.
Right.
I mean, just in order to take a breath and then sing a whole phrase, there's some control of the breath there. So on just a basic level, you are already doing a type of pranayama. You're controlling your breath. And for someone who's maybe hyperventilating or they have some other kind of condition going on there, doing that on a regular basis, I think is extremely helpful. And they've done some studies, and they're beginning to show that group singing has a pretty powerful effect on our endorphins, our nervous system, something about group singing. And that's what this is, a kirtan. It's not a performance. It's not me up there performing and people listening. I just sing the words and the melody, they listen, and then as a group they sing back to me. And I think that that's another part of it, because the group singing, so it doesn't have to be kirtan, it could be a choir
or chanting or something, right? Yeah,
exactly. But in a group, I think it's a very primordial human experience, that group singing. I think it's just something we, as tribal peoples, that's what we did. Again, there was no, I have a good voice, you have a bad voice, I'm going to sing, you're not, where we, in our culture, that's kind of the way we see it. You're a singer, you're not a singer, these people are proved to sing, those people should never sing. And for the way I see it, like, everyone needs to sing, like, it's just so basic. I read a book a while back, This Is Your Brain on Music, and he was saying in that some of the oldest human artifacts they have are like bone flutes. And he said something very interesting. He said, we really don't know if language developed first or music developed first, or if they developed in tandem. So I think most humans think, oh, we're like the ape that speaks. So we learned to talk and then all this stuff happened. But what if that's not how it went? What if we started like making rhythms on logs and hollowing out, little animal bones and making sounds as our first type of communication? Because if you think of it like a baby, will start making noises before they can speak.
Speaking of that, you just hit that button, because I have a 9-month-old, and it's just interesting watching the process. 'Cause I also have a 7-year-old, but it's been a while. So, but with him, he's really into like banging on things, whatever it is around him. He'll pick something up and bang it on something, and then he'll all of a sudden this expression of sound comes out, like oh, and then ba ba ba, and it's kind of like a rhythmical in a way. And that's just his way of expressing and just whatever feelings he's feeling is coming up. So it totally get that, because that's how babies are when they're developing.
Yeah, and I think somebody said, you know, a baby will sing and dance well before it speaks and walks.
Yeah.
Right. So it's so primal as human beings. And then again, in our culture, at least, we tend to cut that off and say, well, you're not a good dancer, so don't dance. You're not a good singer, so don't sing. There are very limited opportunities for people to sing in groups like that or dance in groups. You know, it's sort of like set aside as a thing where we don't get together in big groups and just do that, you know, together and just enjoy that. So kirtans, you know, it provides that. I do a little bit at the beginning and end of every yoga class that I teach because I think it's such a valuable thing. Another thing that's happening is the Kundalini, that energy. You know, you spoke about energy work earlier. I've found that also very valuable for myself and my students. I think you can handle and deal with some of the same stuff that comes up, say in KI, without it being so mental. It's more energetic.
Yeah.
And so for some people, chanting, especially if you're doing it over a prolonged period of time, Krishna Das, who's a very famous kirtan artist, he says that he was introduced to it when he was in India with his teacher, Neem Karoli Baba. And Neem Karoli Baba got them a drum, put them in a room and said, okay, chant. And he said chant, and he never said stop. So we just kept chanting, chanting and chanting. And he said, you go through every emotion, right? So you start out, this is fun. Oh, this is good. Listen to my voice, listen to their voice. Oh, this is great. Then, you know what, 30 minutes, an hour, like, oh God, like really, how much longer? And then an hour, 2 hours later, I'm going to go crazy if I hear this chant one more time. Oh my God, I'm freaking out. I feel anxious. I feel nervous, you know. Then maybe depression, you know, another hour later, like, oh my God, like, you know, I can't do this anymore. I'm just going to stop. I'm going to quit. I can't. And what was interesting is at a certain point, he said, it all stopped. And then it was like, I can just keep chanting. The ego, all of that story, all of that emotion, all of that eventually got burned away. Now, he's not saying that was gone for good, because right when he stopped chanting, it, you know, it can come back. But even just having that experience, I think is that's a type of awakening within itself. If you've never had that kind of experience and then you have that, like, that's, you've now seen that there's something else going on here, right? You've seen what it's like when your mind is calm and you're resting in your true nature, because that's what that experience is. So that can happen through chanting. And then, like I said, if you want to plug into sort of the yoga tradition and you start thinking about energy centers and chakras and all that kind of stuff, it is basically agreed that, you know, mantra practice, chanting practice is a way to move the Kundalini energy. So if that energy is moving and, you know, there's stuck emotions, and like Scott's talking about, I mean, the tradition basically agrees. It says, yes, this stuff is stuck in your body. You have these energies that are, you know, whether you want to call it cellular memory or, you know, granthis, vasanas, samskaras, these things are lodged in there. You begin moving energy. Well, if you think of a pipe with something stuck in it and you begin pushing water through and you get enough water going, it, boom, push something, dislodge it, which isn't always a pleasant experience. You know, I'm sure you've had that where something comes up, you dislodge it, and it's not like immediately it's better, but once it's been processed, then generally the sense is, oh, that was good. That the other side of that experience is, you know, one where you're experiencing more peace and more joy. And that's what all of this is about for me. It really is, in the end. You know, we can call it enlightenment, we can call it, you know, whatever we want, but I think for me, this is about living a human life as fully as you can, and experiencing the love and joy and compassion that is, I think, a natural part if we didn't mess it up. But most of us are, unfortunately, I get goosebumps thinking about your children, that you are raising children and that you have done so much work on yourself, because it's just, again, I get I get goosebumps thinking of like a generation, or even just, individuals who've been raised by very awake parents, spiritually awake parents, and how much potential, because, no one's perfect. So sure, there's may still be some stuff. I think some of this stuff is just karmic too. I think your parents could do everything right.
Yeah.
But you're still going to activate some of these deficiency stories that may be, past life. I don't know, genetic, people talk about genetic memory, and one of my teachers talks a lot about different kinds of karma. So personal karma, family karma, national karma, racial karma, sexual karma, man, woman, all that. He says, there's all these different, it's not like one karma. There's actually all this.
It's a group consciousness of what you believe, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So you may heal your personal karma, Taz, but then you might find at a certain point you bump up against like all the trauma that women have had to deal with. And this is not a popular topic these days, but I actually think modern men are very much traumatized. That's why they're kind of like zombified. They are, I think they're seen as the perpetrators of a lot of what's going on, but I don't see it that way. I actually think they're very unconscious, and they're very, again, they've kind of been taken by society and like programmed, and like, they're not happy. They're not happy. They may seem to have all the power and control, but I actually think they're like zombies. They're like drones. They're just basically like marching, doing what they think they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, they're not in touch with their feelings, their emotions, their spiritual, none of that. Yeah, they're just providing for themselves and the world, and thinking that that's what they need to do in order to survive, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's trauma there to be healed as well. I think the women are ahead of the curve. I think the women have already started to heal and to process a lot of the hurt and things that have happened. But I think the men it's not even begun. It's not even on anyone's radar. No one's really talking about it. It's if anything the opposite, where it's like the men are seen as the perpetrators again, and everyone else is sort of the victim. But I think that there's, at some point, it's going to come to realization that, most perpetrators are themselves victims, right? It may, like the bully has a bully, right? And that's what they say. Every bully has a bully. So it's like there's a lot of trauma there, I think, that will need to be healed at some point and explored. So again, these are things that are interesting, that as a parent, even if you do everything right, even if you're like awake and enlightened, I don't know that, bringing up another human being, that you're going to avoid them still maybe projecting or being traumatized by just the interaction, even if it's a healthy one. I think that's still possible. That, that's why I really encourage my students when doing this work, and, looking at forgiveness, looking at non-judgment. Your parents, I promise you, were doing the best that they could.
Oh, for sure.
However much they messed up, that was their best. And you might think, well, they should have known better. They should have done better. I think if they could have, they would have. That's what we all do. We are always all doing the best that we can. And so again, I feel, I love that you brought up, forgiveness earlier, because to me, that's been so valuable, that, realizing that my parents couldn't be any more awake than they were, and they can't know about tools that they didn't themselves have.
Especially, back then, I mean, these weren't readily available like now. I mean, there's just so much out there for us to explore and to know, but back in the day, it just wasn't as available.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know.
One thing about when you're talking about how you became spiritually awake, I had some experiences too when I was younger, and it was a different form. It's interesting how everybody experiences it differently, but for me, it was more of like music, or another way was for me was just like being in a space where I was grateful for everything, and then life just appeared pretty freaking amazing, just being in that mental space of everything's beautiful. I love this, I love that. But when we have those experiences, we think sometimes that, gosh, how come that just can't stay all the time? That experience of just like being totally one with everything and feeling so good and joyful. But I think there's a spiritual development, right? Can you explain a little bit about what that is?
Yeah. Well, before I get into that, I do want to say that I've been a semi-professional musician most of my life. And early on, before my spiritual awakening, the closest thing I came to feeling like there was God and there was spiritual was playing music.
Yeah, me too. Yeah,
that I very much relate with what you're saying there, because that was like, okay, this is transcendent. This gets me out of myself in a way that nothing else seemed to do. So I love that. But yeah, I think one of the things that no one cleared up for me was, our true nature is that which experiences everything. So a transcendent experience to our true nature is really no different than an experience of suffering. It's all experienced by that which we truly are. So that's really a complete awakening when we know ourselves as that. And the more that we can identify with that and stay in that space, then there tends to be more and more of an acceptance and an ease with, okay, here comes the transcendent experience, here comes the non-transcendent experience, all just different arisings to that which we really are. What happens to a lot of people, and this may have been the same for you, it was for me early on, was I identified the awakeness with the transcendent experience only. And then I failed to recognize that the same awakeness was present even in a moment of suffering or a moment of identification with ego.
Oh, that really, that I love that idea. Yeah, I didn't think of it that way. Thank you.
So that to me is really the big, once I began to really understand that helped so much, because there's such a relaxation that comes with that I think, as long as we're associating presence, awakeness, whatever it is, only with one state, then we will feel like we're oscillating, and we'll see, well, I was so good, and then my in-laws came, and all this kind of back and forth. Whereas if we can just see that, the conditioning that might arise when our in-laws are around, or when my boss is yelling at me, or when I'm triggered or whatever, like that is also arising to the same awareness, and is being experienced within the same awareness. And then that so much more, I feel, is allowed, because otherwise there's a lot of self-judgment and self-identification with that. When the suffering or the triggers or the unpleasant experiences arise, we think, oh, I lost it, whatever it was. When in reality, it's not, it didn't go anywhere. That is what is experiencing. So they're all just different states, and it's all there in the Zen tradition. So that's the thing is, Zen, if it's presented in the right way, and if people are really awake with people as they hopefully can sense what you need. I just personally didn't, and it could be my fault. I mean, I'm not trying to put it on anybody. I just know that was not made clear to me. And so I really had a hard time. It really was, oh, I lost it. where did it go? How do I get it back? And just a ton of confusion.
And then people, they seem to get addicted to these experiences where they want to go and do the ayahuasca over and over again, or they want to meditate for hours on end, or it just seems extreme, right? I mean, that's not really peaceful.
It's really chasing a certain state. So, a bliss state, an ecstatic state. They're talking a lot about flow state now, and they clearly say flow state is addictive. So you and I with music, that's a flow state. So we it's very pleasurable. It's transcendent, all this wonderful stuff. But yes, like is it healthy or a good idea for you and I to say, okay, Taz, let's start a band and we're going to, get high on playing music together. And then for you to neglect your child and your job and all this stuff. I mean, there's a place for flow. There's a place for transcendent experiences. There's a place for ecstasy and bliss. But I don't think as human beings, we're wired to experience that all the time.
No.
And I also don't think it's necessarily healthy. And it can be problematic because I may even sometimes speak about things like the peace that passeth all understanding, or I might talk about joy and how joyful my life is. And it's subtle because in a sense, I can experience unpleasant states and enjoy them. And I think that's confusing for people because they're sort of like, well, no, you just said it was unpleasant, but there's a certain, state in which you it's like you can just allow the conditioning and you can allow everything. It's almost like what I really am can kind of allow Douglas to have a human experience, which includes pleasure, pain, winning, losing, flow state, blissful, ecstatic states, and also like complete boredom. And for me, that's really what I'm trying to share and teach. I think that's what the message of Zen is. What is enlightenment? Chopping wood and carrying water, like with just everyday life. But when you really allow that on a very deep level, it itself becomes blissful. So it's weird because there's this kind of surface bliss, not bliss dichotomy. But what Zen is really pointing to is that state before that distinction was even made, if that makes sense.
Can you repeat that last sentence you said?
So Zen, and I think teachers like Scott and they are pointing to the state before the distinction between blissful and not blissful was even made.
Right.
So that's where we really want to start living. So, yes, like this form and this mind and this heart can experience heartbreak, disappointment, anger, frustration, all the human stuff. But there is, you could say, a part of me and a part of everyone. It's not unique to me. I just am maybe more aware of it than your average person. But there's a part of me that is enjoying that experience. The whole, the up and the down, the whole ride. It's saying, yes, it's saying yes to the human experience, which is interesting in contrast again to sort of like what, I think a lot of these, what's held up as a spiritual teacher, which is like someone who goes into some bliss state and you have to wake them up and feed them because they're so unconscious of everything. And, that's where I'm kind of like, if that's what you want, then I'm not your guy, because I have zero desire for that. I also don't really, again, coming from the Zen tradition, that's never been held up as the goal or a desirable thing. Buddha was very much about presence and this moment and living in the present moment fully, being with our experience. So there's nothing in my training or anything that really says we're trying to experience some kind of transcendent bliss state beyond this human experience. This human experience is blissful when we're in the right relationship with it. And when I say blissful, again, that includes unpleasant experiences. Like unpleasant experiences are actually blissful. They are allowed and enjoyed by our true nature, our ultimate nature. So it's like the more fundamental your experience of your nature is, the more is allowed and the more is enjoyed. Whereas when we're at that kind of like first awakening experience, it's like, no, I want the full transcendent. I don't want the normal Doug experience. I'm rejecting that. I'm trying to push that away. That's not spiritual. I can't get mad. A lot of stuff that Scott talks about, where there's a lot of this repression because we think, well, that's not it.
Yeah.
Then I think later on, what we can come to realize is that, oh, this appears and that appears, and it's all
rich. I mean, all the feelings that we are able to experience as a human being, everything from the joy to the grief to the sadness to the to excitement. I mean, all of it. It's like we get to experience that.
Yeah, what a
throughout our life. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I agree totally. So for me, I think that that's really the goal of knowing ourselves as that which can handle all of that, can experience all of that in safety. I mean, it's not a guarantee of this thing always being safe. I mean, this thing's gonna go one day. I mean, that's a given. So, someone could bust in here and hold a gun to my head and make it go in 15 minutes from now. There's just no guarantee of this thing's safety.
Yeah.
But even that experience is, we could say, a rich experience. And the analogy I'll use for my students a lot of times is, we pay money to go see movies where people get killed, people break up, people have a heartache. Was it a good movie? Yes, I cried. But then in our own lives, it's like we're trying to know everything controlled exactly the way I want it to be. I'm not going to get upset. I'm not going to get angry. I'm not going to where did we get this idea that that's preferable to really immersing ourselves in the human experience? But again, I think a lot of us, we're introduced to these emotions at such a young age. We are very tender. We feel things very deeply when we're young like that. And the people around us, the adults around us, are telegraphing. So, like one of the things that comes up a lot in KI is like sadness repression, right? So or joy repression even. So you might think, well, why would I repress sadness? Well, it's like, oftentimes, and again, everyone means well. It's not anyone's being evil or bad necessarily, but you have a child, it's crying, your heart goes out to them, you feel bad and you want the crying to stop. But it's like, that's where learning to hold your own space, right? Being able to allow the child and let the child know it's okay to cry is like a huge thing. But like most adult humans wouldn't do that. They would immediately either try and fix it, or they might be like, hey, you're making me feel bad because you're crying, so I'm going to try and guilt or you into stopping. And I mean, plenty of that happened in my own childhood, and I imagine it does in most. It's very rare that someone would be like, hey, yeah, go cry it out, it's good, no problem. So being able to hold space for people's emotions and what they go through, and encouraging them to feel and be aware, I think is such a rare thing for young people. So my
9-month-old, he'll, there's nights where he's learning how to sleep on his own now, or fall asleep on his own. And so he'll just cry. And I'll go in every so often, pat him on the back, and then leave. I won't stay very long, and just let him learn how to put himself back to sleep. And it's one of the hardest things you can do, because you just want to be there and you don't want them to cry in that so hard and so long. But I know it's the perfect thing for him to learn, because that's such a huge life lesson is that we have to learn how to calm ourselves, to soothe ourselves, to know that everything's going to be okay within ourselves instead of somebody always doing it for us, right?
Right. Yeah. Or making us repress that.
Repress that. Yeah.
Yeah. Feel guilty for whatever we're, experiencing or feeling. So, the adults around us, giving us the space we need to self-regulate, right? And then also encouraging us to not repress what is uncomfortable for them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So again, if an adult isn't comfortable with anger or, a temper tantrum. I mean, I remember my parents used to do this when I would have a temper tantrum, and they'd pretend they're like, oh, you're such a good actor. Like, they pretend they're filming me essentially,
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, I was upset. I was legitimately upset. It wasn't, but, this is a way of sort of, for them managing that, making me feel like I was being ridiculous. It's almost like gaslighting, like, oh, you're so upset at this, oh, cry, you're not really upset. But I was.
Yeah.
And so I get it. I think being a parent is probably the hardest thing that anybody can do. And again, I don't think it's
there's no manual on how to do it. That's for sure.
No, and I don't think you can get it, right. I don't know that there's a perfect, like people will talk about books. I know people who are fans of certain methods and they say it worked for them. I'm like, yeah, but I have a friend. I know several people like this, but there's one specific story. She had her first child and, everything she did worked. So she would lecture her friends, well, just do this and they'll go back to sleep. Just do that and they'll stop crying. Just do this.
Oh, every baby's different. That doesn't happen. Yeah.
She had her second one and she had to call all her friends and apologize. Be like, I don't know what I was talking about. Because yes, they are an individual, right? So what works with one person, even though they're a child, it's still a person. It isn't necessarily going to work with somebody else.
My first child was sleeping by 3-4 months old all night long, 12 hours. This one, he's still, I mean, there's most nights he's sleeping through the night, but it took 10 months for us to get here with that. And we're all learn in our own way, and you just got to be patient with it. It's like the biggest learning. He's like my biggest teacher. That's all I could say.
And I think that's beautiful. That's exactly what I would expect from someone who's really awake as a parent is I'm going to learn from them. And I think that's from my perspective, that is the right attitude from, what I see, because it, in a sense, we want to get out of their way and let them develop, to be who they really are. So much of the work, we see happening from my perspective anyway, with Scott is, trying to undo what was done to all these people, by their parents and well-meaning people, but these programs, these repressions, these traumas were put in there by the people around because on some level we were told we're not okay as we are, right? We were sort of told that, like, it's not okay to be sad, it's not okay to be angry, it's not okay to be happy, whatever it is. And so we learn to shut that part down. So I get it, it's hard. So that's, I put that out there for sure. And that's where I really encourage students, you're going to benefit yourself by practicing forgiveness and non-judgment around your parents, because we're all messing up in someone's eyes, right? I put it that way. Like someone thinks I'm doing it wrong right now, listen to this talk, even like, what a jerk, or I can't believe you said that, or, so, I mean, this is just human life. Like no one, even like a Jesus, there may be a lot of people who think Jesus is perfect, but not everybody, or Buddha. There's no human who's ever existed on this planet who everyone can point to and say, well, there's perfection. So am I really doing it wrong, or am I just expressing who I am? Whatever that is. So, there's two ways of looking at it. Either everyone's imperfect or everyone's perfectly who they are at that moment. And, it's not about making excuses when we mess up. I mess up all the time, and I'm happy to look at that and be like, oh, whoops, that was an unintended consequence, or I didn't mean for that to happen, or,
Mhm.
I'm not trying to hurt anybody. But those things happen regardless. That's what's funny about being human, is you can have the best intentions. When I teach, I'm just coming from a place of like pure love, really. I feel like if you have a real awakening, I think part of that is the need to share it. Like, you just can't keep it to yourself. And it doesn't mean you become a spiritual teacher. I mean, we all share in our own way, but I feel like that's a hallmark of a real awakening. Is like, you just can't keep it to yourself. You really feel like, I need to share this in any way I can.
Yeah.
That's where I'm coming from. But like I said earlier, talking with Scott, like, some people, they don't see me that way at all. And they're really, that's human experience. It's fascinating that,
Not everybody's gonna like us, and that's okay, right? Yeah.
and it's just letting everyone be themselves, and also
Mhm.
letting ourselves be who we are. And again, just forgiving ourselves, forgiving others, not
Mhm.
judging ourselves when we are maybe feel like we're less than we could be, and then doing that for others. But I just find it's such a circular thing. I think if you're not doing that for yourself, you're going to come down really hard on other people.
Mhm.
If you're not forgiving others and working on not judging them, you're going to just judge yourself, on maybe unconsciously. You won't even realize you're doing it, but there'll
Mhm.
be a
Mhm.
lot of defensiveness because you're afraid that it's true, whatever it is someone's saying about you. You're like, no. So
Exactly. Yeah. The judgment is a big thing for sure. When you realize you're trying to control things and you're like, well, why are you doing it this way, or why are you doing it that way? Yeah. I definitely have gotten caught up in that sorts of, I mean, it's still stuff I'm working on, because I came from a family where, there's more judgment and more like controlling. And so I think we are always working through those things where we came from. So
mhm.
absolutely, for sure. Gosh, this has been quite a conversation. It's been pretty amazing. And I'm just so glad that I reached out to you and you were so open to wanting to be here and just talk. And I think it's so important for us to get this message out to people and know that there's avenues for them to get the help that they may need, and to feel more of that joy and that peace that's already there, right? That to become
Yes.
more aware of who they really are.
Yes,
So
that's
can you
perfect.
tell people a little bit about where they can find you? And I'll definitely put the links down below so people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, great. Yeah, well, if you're in the Atlanta area, you might be able to take class with me in person. But the
Okay.
best place to connect is um, my Patreon page right now is where I'm most active. So it's Patreon/Mahāpatha Yoga, um, and it's just very phonetic. Mahāpatha.
And we'll put a link down there so that people,
Yeah, so
yeah.
it's patreon.com/Mahāpatha Yoga. But if you go to my website, which is just mahapathayoga.com, that'll also take you there. And the reason it's Mahāpatha Yoga, not Douglas Johnson, is I really didn't want the focus to be on me. I
Mhm.
really was more interested in creating a community, a conscious community of practitioners and yogis, and um, my role is as the founder and leader, but it's a role, but I don't even necessarily think it's the most important role.
Mhm.
It's weird. It's hard to explain, but I mean, it really is the people that support me that make the community, make Mahāpatha Yoga. So,
Mhm.
um, that's kind of my vision is it's a community of practitioners, people who are interested in truth and cleaning up. I posted a talk relatively recently, wake up and then clean up. And I don't mean clean up your house. I mean, clean up all this stuff, because that's really, I think, the journey. And as I said, I'm focusing more and more on post-awakening these days, because waking up, I think there's quite a number of people who are awake. They've had legitimate experiences. They've woken up. They see, oh, I'm doing this thing. I have this pattern. I'm treating my partner this way. I wish I want to stop, but they have no idea how to stop, how to change that. And that's where with post-awakening, I could have used so much help, and it would have changed everything for me. Ultimately, I don't think there are any mistakes. So, my path is what it was, and I got lost for a long time. And that gave me a lot of valuable lessons that I share with my students, where I try and help them avoid those things. But I think that's kind of what if you're not awake, I have many tools to help you like wake up. If you're not sure what that means, or if you are or not, I can help you there too. And then once you are awake, that's really where I think having a relationship with someone you can talk to. And that's another thing I'd love to convey here, is that like I'm accessible. Like, I mean, I love teachers like Rupert Spira and Adya Shanti and Scott Killaby. I mean, but you have very limited, if any, access to these people, and
because they're pretty popular, and there are a lot of people that are
yeah. So I find that sometimes you do need to speak face to face with. You have a question, you need it answered, you have a very specific situation. I feel like we need more of that. We need teachers who are really awake and accessible. I mean, if my thing were to blow up, it may get to a point where I can't do that either. But I mean, at least right now, it's absolutely, it's not that hard to have a meeting with me, a one-on-one, phone, Zoom meeting, whatever it is. And that's where more and more my work is going. And the KI plays in with that. So that's another tool where if we determine, okay, you've got this stuff that's stuck and it's gnarly, you're trying to clean up, and you're finding there's spots that just you can't get on your own, and that's where we can work together and hopefully clean that up.
Which we definitely, this is definitely a community type situation where we can't get everything on our own. There's just no way we can see it all, That's why it's always good to have a facilitator or a mentor to help you, because we've been hiding behind some of these things for so many years that we're just clueless sometimes to some things.
I think so. I like to say that, if we took away all the road signs and I said, okay, and I pointed, and I said, San Francisco's in that direction, go get to San Francisco. You might make it, probably not.
Take a long time.
Take a long time, and you probably will get lost. And so that's what I like to say with reading scriptures and on your own, not having a community, not having a teacher, just on your own, which I find a lot of Americans have that kind of individualistic streak. Like, I don't need anybody. I'm just going to read, it's like, maybe, I'm never going to say you can't do it on your own. I'm never going to say that you have to have a teacher, but it's so hard. It's, why not make it easier by having a teacher and a community?
And it's like with anything you want to learn. If you want to learn how to play the piano, if you want to learn how to play golf, if you want to learn how to be a millionaire, you're going to go talk to somebody who's already been on that path and already doing it and doing it well. Just like you are. You've been on this path of spirituality and awakening and all the different things all the tools that you've learned, and just the commitment you put into all this. So you would be the one to go to if you want to become more awake and more conscious in your life, right?
Well, I'm all I can do is make myself available. And I do, just from experience, know that at least some people find value in that relationship. So that's what that's how I've tried to structure things, is, in again, Buddhism, they have a saying, the three refuges or treasures: the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. And I really feel that is a valuable teaching, that, you have the the Buddha, the teacher, the Sangha, the community, and then the teaching, the Dharma, the way. And I think that that's really, if you have only the way, maybe, if you just have some, Buddhist scripture laying around and you read that, maybe you can really milk that, and you can get to San Francisco, you can get to enlightenment. But it's going to be hard. You're choosing a really hard path, and I get it, because it can be hard to find teachers. I mean, I think in spirituality there are a lot of people who are not sincere, who are willing to take advantage of. They may even have some realization, but it's not complete, and they have enough ego there that they are not above using the realization they have to take advantage of other people. They may not even see it that way. They may actually think that they're, that that's legitimate, or that they're helping people. But so I get it. It's the Wild West out there, right? Because it's not like a certification means that somebody is necessarily has your best interest at heart or is legitimate. I mean, spirituality really, I think, it's often a feeling. And it's interesting when you have students, sometimes they can be really, really, they put you up on a pedestal. And then very often those that want to see you as like more than human, or that you have some kind of like special quality, then when you disappoint them and you show them your humanity, they're the ones who very often just really want to trash you and be like, and it's like, I never held myself out to be anything but a fallible human. So, trying to manage those expectations, that I definitely have helped and can help people, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to make mistakes. It doesn't mean I'm not 100% human. It just is, I'm like a guide. That's kind of how I see it, is I can get you to San Francisco. I can help you navigate the terrain. And I'm very sincere in that. Like, I will do, almost everything in my power to help you. But I just find that, oftentimes students, again, they're afraid to reach out when they need to, that they can reach a problem. And then I don't know if they're like, well, I don't think he can help me with this, or I don't want to bother him, or I don't know what the barrier is there, or I can't afford it, which is, again, brings us back to that conversation about money.
Yeah.
That's where I try and tell students, like, I'd much rather help you and not get paid than have you have an issue, a spiritual issue that you're struggling with, and you not reaching out to me. So that's where I try and say, like, it's always preferable that you reach out. And then if I'm in a situation where I'm too busy, or I need the money, so I have to put my, I'll let you know that, I'll communicate that to you. But for the most part, I'm not rich. I'm not even really that comfortable in terms of finances, but, there's a roof here, there's food in the fridge, the AC and heat are working. So that's really all I need. Cars running, so more than that is extra from my perspective. So as long as those bases are covered, if there's someone who truly is in a financial bind, but they're having a spiritual crisis, like, I would rather help that person than have them say, well, I can't get help because I can't afford it. Now, the one thing I'll say on that is, some people, I've heard stories before. As I said, I've done a lot of retreats, and one of the retreat centers I go to, the owner there conveyed to me that sometimes people will come on retreat and the facilitator will waive their tuition, because someone will say, well, I'm a hardship case, I don't have money. So the facilitator will say, okay, you don't have to pay my part. You still need to pay your food and your lodging. You have to pay me, because I'm hard up. And what the owner of this retreat center said is, sometimes those same people will book a massage. over $100 for the massage.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of going back to where we started, which people can be a little screwy when it comes to spiritual teaching and the value of this. And so, that would be the one thing I ask is, if you're going to say you can't afford it, well, what are you affording? High-speed internet, fancy car, payments on a fancy car, trips, vacations, things like that. Well, if those are things you're doing, then it really isn't, you can't afford it. It's just that you're not valuing.
Yeah. Maybe you're not ready to actually do deep, dive into this. And, I'm sure between you and me, we spent thousands of dollars to do different types of workshops and retreats. And I've spent lots of money. I mean, this is my passion. So I totally get that. And if somebody's not ready to pay, then they're not ready to dive deep, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's probably
all right. So again, I'm going to leave all your links below so that everybody can get in touch with you, and if they're ready to dive deep and look more into themselves and work through some of those things that have been blocking them in certain parts of their life, because there's different aspects of our life that if one way is blocked, then probably a lot of the other ways are blocked. That's kind of how it all works. So please reach out to Doug, and I'm sure that he would love to work with you and guide you, and because he's probably experienced what you've experienced, and so he knows what probably doesn't work and what probably would really benefit you. And Doug, you seem to be really intuitive, and you seem to really connect, on a heart level, and which is awesome, and very humble. So that's what I love about you.
Thank you, Tess. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And everybody, please go ahead and like this video, subscribe so we can get more videos out here like this, and have an awesome rest of your week. And we will talk to you later.